Hey, everyone, and welcome to the Rome Summit, Session 3, Journaling in Rome. Jason Griffin here. Thrilled to have you with us. Looking forward to a really lively and quality discussion today, all about journaling in Rome. I think it's such a great use case. And again, I know this is going to be a fabulous conversation. So without any delay, we're going to jump right in. I wanted to start, as I always do, by giving some quick introductions to our very esteemed panelists here from the Rome community. So starting with Andy Henson. Andy is joining us from Tamworth in the UK. Andy runs a software agency called Foxsoft, where they build and support clients with web-based software to run their businesses more effectively. He loves learning new things and trying to become a better person. Andy has written an effective note-taking course with Rome Research. This is an email course designed to introduce beginners to the software. He writes about Rome on his blog at elaptics.co.uk. And he also has a fabulous newsletter that I know many of us are familiar with called Letters from a Roman, which goes out twice a month. Andy's primarily uses Rome for aspects of running his business, self-reflection, knowledge synthesis, and to curate and write his newsletter and for his blog. Andy, welcome.
Hi, everyone.
Our second panelist today is Mark McElroy. Mark is an author, a media producer, and creativity coach based in New Albany, Mississippi. Since June 2020, he's been using Rome Research for journaling, note-taking, and fiction writing. Mark is fascinated with how working in Rome alters the way that we think. In addition to blogging about Rome Research applications at markmcelroy.com, Mark is also the producer of a great series called 60 Seconds to Rome. This is a YouTube series teaching basic concepts in 1 minute or less. He's also an eager supporter and contributor to the Rome Book Club. Mark, welcome to the summit.
Thanks for having me, Jason. I appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to have you here. And then last, but certainly not least, we've got Tracy Winchell, and Tracy's joining us from Fort Smith, Arkansas. She's been behind a mic since 1984 as a broadcaster, TV journalist, and radio DJ. You'll hear that in her voice today. Happy to have that here. Tracy is currently helping people meet their best future selves through journaling and self-awareness. She's got a lot of contributions to the Rome community, including a course called Roman Journals for Self-Awareness and Growth. And she also, I think, just launched, if I'm correct, Tracy, a mini course called 30 Days to Rome. She uses Rome to think, write, plan, remember how to do things, which is a huge help with her ADHD brain. Reading from her description there, so not my words. And then measure productivity and growth and tell herself the truth about habits and results. Tracy, welcome.
Hey, it's good to see you. Now, I did originally take this mini course and call it 30 Days to Rome, but I made it even shorter. It's 5 days to Rome.
Oh, beautiful. Okay, great. So 5 days to Rome, and that is just released, I believe, correct?
Yes, pre-release. So now I get to finish building it.
There you go. Good stuff. Well, we'll talk more about that at the end. And of course, I'll include that in all of the session notes once we are complete here. And I get those sent out. So as we get ready to get started here, just very quickly, wanted to tee up at a high level how we're going to structure today's conversation. And so from a very high level, 3 main buckets that we're going to divide our conversation into today. Number one, we're going to talk about writing. So we're going to get into some of the mechanics of how to journal in Rome. We're going to hear from all of our panelists about sort of strategies and tips that they use to optimize, again, the mechanical side of journaling in Rome and how to make the most of that. From there, we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about reflection. So you put all of this information into your graph. What do you do with it? Do you spend time going back and taking a look at it, making sure that you're learning from that, and improving reflection is a huge part of the journaling practice. And so we'll spend some time talking about that. And then we'll close out with getting started. So overcoming common challenges, creating a habit that sticks, those sorts of topics. So again, that is how we will structure the conversation at a high level. And we're going to go ahead and jump right in, starting with writing in your journal. And I want to come over to Tracy first with this initial question. And Tracy, can you start by just giving us kind of a crash course of the basics of writing in your Rome journal? Talk us through at a high level how you approach that.
For me, it begins with the daily notes page template. And as much as I want to fiddle with it and create all sorts of constraints, the simpler I make my constraints, the better. I'll let me just show you that just so you can get a high level of what that looks like. Let's see. I've got a daily notes page in my public graph open, and be glad to share that here in the chat so that you can follow along there. But my personal daily notes page looks like this. And again, this is in my public graph. I just wanted to make sure that everything stayed private. So the README first is something that Roam Hacker helped me put together so that it recalls my note to my next day self, and we can go into that later. So my next day's daily notes page begins with a note to my next day self, which is at the end of the previous day. And then it will appear here so that I see it. I've been writing a note to my next day self for a long time, but I rarely resurfaced it to actually read it. And, there's power in actually reading my previous day self because it gives me confidence because I'm not quite as dumb as I look sometimes. And that's a joke. I don't really believe that. But the next piece of that is I set up my today and I nest underneath here my morning pages. And I really like to have a timestamp. Like this morning, I fired this off at 9:37. I just like to know how long it takes me to do my pre-launch sequence, take care of the dog, take care of the cat, do some stretching exercises, yada, yada, yada. How long does it take me from the time I get up to the time I actually fire off my daily notes page sequence? So that's one thing I do. So I do my daily note or my my morning pages here. We could talk about some of this later. I'm also experimenting with this didn't translate over, but a list of 5 things I can do today. Then this is my interstitial journaling log, and everything that I do throughout the rest of the day is going to go into one of those buckets. If I'm not sure where it goes, then it goes into notes. So my daily practice begins right here with this, and everything else gets dumped into there throughout the day.
Got it. And Tracy, one question I have is those prompts that you're using, are you pretty locked into those? Do those evolve over time? Do you change them from day to day, week to week? Sort of what's your approach with kind of the high level structure of the block that you're using to journal?
So I have 2 anchors in my morning pages, and at some point, if we have time, I'd like to come back to that and just kind of explain how I build my morning pages, because I have 2 anchors. The first anchor is a line about today, and that gives me the freedom to write just a line if I want, but I can write 10 lines if I want. It's just a quick way to wake up my brain. The next thing that I do is a Dear Abba, which sets my mind from what's in my head and looking at what's in my head and examining it to remembering where I fit into the universe. It helps me humble myself, find some gratitude, get outside myself, and to consider the people that I love and to be grateful for all that I have in my household since we've been in a pandemic. The next phase is where I have the freedom to work on a couple of different things. And I have 2 main things that guide me there. And like I said, if we have some time, I'll be glad to share that with you. I just don't want to get so stuck in the weeds at this point that we lose track of everything.
Sure. Yeah. No, happy to come back to that. Let's, like you said, let's stay high level for now, and let's come over to Andy. And Andy, why don't you give us just kind of a quick overview of, again, your tactics? So starting at a very high level, how do you do your journals? How are those structured? Give us an overview of that.
So I'll share my screen as well. And this is going to be the nerve-wracking bit where I'm going to share my own actual live roam graph. So hopefully you guys are seeing my screen. So this is today. I have actually sanitized it a little bit, but I'm hoping I don't click around and accidentally show things that I shouldn't be showing. It's kind of difficult. I normally use Roam 42 and the privacy mode, but that's to hide my journaling stuff from other things. But the whole point of this session is to actually show you the journaling stuff. So we'll see how this goes. I do several things. It's interesting. Mine's not quite as pretty as Tracy's daily notes page, but I do the same thing. The daily note page is kind of the anchor for everything. It's really the thing that Rome kind of got me into doing, and it's changed my thinking, and part of that is because of the journaling aspect of it. So that note to my next day self, this is what I got from Tracy, and I probably won't go into that because I'll let Tracy explain more about that, and I'm sure we'll talk about it shortly. But essentially I would write that at the end of the day, and then I used Rome's Delta feature to fire it into the next day. So this is actually yesterday's. That isn't actually what I wrote, but this is how it would appear at the beginning of my page, and then everything else from here on down then is what I template out every day, which is another Rome 42 smart block thing, because the reminders section I'll come back to, because when we get into talking about reflections and things like that, this is where these reminders come into it. Today's reflection then is I'm an aspiring Stoic, so part of my daily sort of flow of things is my general morning routine is I go and get up and I make a coffee, and then I come and sit down at my desk. I open Rome, I read the note that I left for myself, I'll read through my reminders, and then I'll read through my daily reflection. So this is just pulling a random block from Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. So I just spend a few minutes reading and reflecting on that, and then I jump into my morning pages thing. So this is where, again, I pull some random blocks, and maybe we'll talk about it more later. I have a huge collection of questions and prompts that it pulls from, and then I'll have a question like this. Now, I think the bit that I wanted to kind of mostly talk about with this was from the structural perspective. I have the sections, which are all page references, and then the questions that I answer. So this is actually what I had this morning show up, and this is what I wrote only briefly this morning. But this is a block reference to this question, and that is because if I show you my collection page, then what this shows me is how many times I've actually answered this question. It gives me a couple of different ways of looking at this later. So again, we'll probably talk more about this when we get into talking about the review and reflection. But I just answer the questions, and then if I want to, I will write more, or again, I'll use smart blocks, and I have one for more morning questions, which will just pull me another one. So if I'm really feeling it, I'll get some more questions, and they'll all just pull through, and I'll answer as much as I want, or I'll just free write depending on how I'm feeling.
Yeah, very cool.
So thoughts and work log, I do the same with Tracy. That's where I do interstitial journaling kind of stuff, and then the workday and evening reflection is same again, answering the same things, and that's pretty much how I kind of do each day's daily notes.
That's great. Definitely a couple of things we will come back to there, like you alluded to. I did want to, you and Tracy now have both mentioned interstitial journaling, and I know that is a pretty popular topic in the Rome community, and many people on the call are probably familiar with it. But in case there are listeners today who aren't familiar with that concept, give us the quick overview. What is interstitial journaling all about?
Essentially, it is a way of just being more mindful of what you're doing when you're doing it. So for me, you basically start your entry, do a timestamp, and then it's a kind of a way of resetting for me, where I just say, where am I right now? What's in my head that I need to get out, and then what am I going to do? And kind of, I depending on what I'm doing, I might go into a whole kind of ultra working type cycle thing for certain things, but otherwise it's just a way of getting set in the day. And then it also just gives you a convenient place to sort of jot thoughts as they crop up as you're doing your work or whatever. And then once you've finished the task that you're doing, you kind of, again, take another moment, think about what you've done. Is there anything else you're still thinking of? throw those kind of things, wrap anything up. For me, particularly where it kind of comes into like this general journaling topic is I treat this as a really discrete feedback loops. So you can reflect very briefly on what you were just doing and anything you noticed, and jot that down. And again, I have a couple of things we'll probably again see later in the review stage. I tag things as either lessons learned, or when I do something particularly dumb, I just tag it with facepalm, and it just gives me a chance to review those at a later point and kind of learn from them. It pretty much is that, yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I've dabbled with interstitial journaling a little bit, and I've found that on days where I can get into the habit of doing it, it does really help. Sort of the biggest thing for me that I've found is like it really brings closure to the task that I was just working on, and allows me to shift into the next thing with a much cleaner slate. Where we all have those days where you're just kind of going meeting to meeting or getting pulled from task to task, and you kind of get this residue almost of the previous task clouding your thought. And I found interstitial journaling really helpful for that. So we won't go too deep on that, but if that is a topic that anyone listening is not familiar with, definitely worth some digging. There's a great article that I'll include when I send out the session notes for this. But let's come over to Mark. So Mark, how about you? Give us a high level of your journaling input, your writing practice.
Okay, well, I'm going to walk the same tightrope that Andy did and open up my actual journal, which I hope will not contain any unpleasant surprises for us all. This is today's page that I've already been writing in today, and you can see it being filled in as we go. And I use my journal both as a place for personal reflection, but also for day planning and for sort of getting my mind wrapped around what's going to go on during the course of my day. So if we come down here and we take a peek, you can see where I've been thinking about what we talk about today. I did want to show you my first journal entry over here in the sidebar, which, as you can see, is very plain, not a lot of indentation. This was on June 28th, when I was amazed by the fact that I could drop a URL to a tweet into the page and see it nicely represented there in a graphic way. But my early journals, they are very unindented generally, and they are very just sort of bullet after bullet after bullet of text. And that's changed a lot. That's not exactly how I use Roam today. I am depending a lot on a template now. And as a result, I'm someone that is really kind of drawn to that structure. I used to do those free writing, free form morning pages like Julia Cameron, teaches folks to do as part of their journaling effort. But I find that I'm really enjoying getting into a basic structure. So here's the template I'll use, and I can give you an idea about how it looks just by summoning it using basically just the standard templating built into Roam. So that expands, and I have my little habit tracker here. This is where I'm putting in some of the metrics that are important to me as I'm sort of engaged in some experiments to improve my life. And every morning I'm logging things like my current weight, for example, for that day. And at the end of the day, I come back and I give each day a daily score on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 would be a really terrible day, 10 would be fantastic. And I enter that data over time. I have just started using attributes as tags for this. And it's one of those things where I go, why didn't I do this from the beginning? Because they make such a cool table. I'll drop into that quickly, but I love the way this gets displayed by Roam. And it's something that I want to do a lot more of in the future, because you can see fluctuations in your daily data without really having to dig to find them. So I'll be filling that out later today. But then the journal entry, you can see the basic structure here. There's a morning and evening section. I start with just whatever's on my mind. This is a chance to get things out of my head and onto the screen where I can get some perspective on them. And then after that comes a random writing prompt. And I used to do this really manually, like cutting and pasting things. I do have a page of writing prompts. Right now, there's probably about 100 in this long list. The only thing that really, I think, that's slightly different in terms of what I do with my writing prompts is I'm trying to link them. They're all going to be just drawn at random, from a big pool, but I'm trying to write them in a way that they link to recent events. After all, I'm filling out a daily page. And so rather than say something like, what's a self-criticism you think of? I'll key that to what's a self-criticism you've heard lately and what could you do about it today? Or rather than ask about just a random sort of prompt, say, what's something you could commit to? I'll always key that to today. Or what's something that happened yesterday that fell into this category? And that seems to help me process the present in ways I might not with more general prompts. So when I summon that prompt for the day, Rome 42 comes through for me, thanks Rome Hacker, and brings me in one of those from the list. I try if it's pulled from someone else, I give them credit, like Dickie Bush for this particular question. And then I have a little section that is a word count based block where I can come in and answer that. I try to shoot for a minimum of about 250 words as part of my morning meditation. In the evening, I'm trying to note things I'm grateful for. So I always come in and have a little entry about that. The cool thing about that we'll talk more about in the reflection section is the business of, since I know I'm going to write something that I was grateful for in the evening, during the day, I'm on the lookout for things to be grateful for. And it changes your mindset about the things that are happening and attunes your awareness to look for things that you feel gratitude about. And then there's the list of what happened today. And for me, that is usually just going to be, here's my kind of morning reflections. And then in the evenings, you see the sort of what happened today business coming through. I could probably show you that better yesterday. So in the evening, I sat down, here's something I was grateful for. Things that happened to me during the day, you can see where I'm talking about an interview I did with someone who inspired me. The Mexican food we ate last night at the local Mexican restaurant. The bricklayer starting some work outside for us, these kind of things. So that becomes a nice running log of the stuff that's going on in my day. So I use this structure to sort of capture things that are important to me and also to remind myself what I call these areas of my life I'm working on domains, what domains really got expressed and worked on in my life today. And then any experiments I have going on, and these are like sort of like projects, but I've got some kind of goal. I'm going to be watching and noticing to see what goes on. I keep a note about how my experiments are going each day. And right now, this is my active experiment, little 60 Seconds to Rome series. And so a little note about that appears, and I can always click that block and go see what I've always thought about that experiment over a series of days. So that's sort of the structure I'm working in. And it's serving me well. It's evolved over time from something very plain to a structure that I really depend on.
Yeah. That was one comment I wanted to make. And I'm really glad that you thought to show that first entry and how plain that was, and then contrast that with what you're doing today. And I think the takeaway there, especially for anyone who's watching or listening that might be a newer user to Rome, is that, these practices evolve over time. And that's one of the great things about Rome, is that it lends itself to kind of an iterative and continual improvement process in your writing. And so as you're just getting started out, it's really important to remember that and not get too hung up on like trying to get it perfect right out of the gate, right? Because you can always continue to refine and improve that. There was one question that came in that I'd love to touch on, because you guys all three had a pretty templated approach now. Mark, you talked about how you started off pretty freeform. You guys are all using a pretty templated approach now. Question came in from Glenn in the live chat. Where can we grab these daily page templates? Now, I don't want to get too far down in the weeds on this, but I did notice, Mark, that you're using the built-in template function in Rome, I think, for your high-level template. And then Tracy and Andy, you guys are both using Smart Blocks, if I recall correctly, for the template. So Mark, maybe you can talk for just a minute about your the templating approach that you use, and maybe have you evaluated using the Smart Blocks from Rome Hacker, and why maybe didn't you go that route, and Tracy and Andy have?
I think for a long time, I fetishized the idea of using nothing but vanilla Rome. And for a long time, that was really important to me for some reason. I don't really know why. But one of the things that I think Rome Hacker's Rome 42 Smart Blocks does so well is that random element. And that's very important to me. The serendipity of what Rome can surface for me from the things that I've noticed before that I might not be thinking of right now, and see them in different contexts. That's really important. So while I still use Rome's built-in templating function to create my daily template, I have added now that element. And I'm a much happier person now that there's a little spice in my vanilla Rome, that random element in my daily template that helps me incorporate that serendipitous input.
Yeah. Cool. And there are some again, some questions coming in. And so I just want to, we're going to keep moving for now, and maybe hang out. We might be able to do some Q&A at the end where we can get a little deeper on templates. But the point I did want to make, because I do see a couple of questions. One there, how do we replicate Mark's template without, being a hacker or coder to get this set up? That came in from Alex. And want to be totally clear, there's a built-in templating function in Rome. I use it. I don't use smart blocks, at least yet, for my templates. And Alex, I'm with you. I'm not a hacker or coder. I'm definitely on the lesser end of the technical spectrum. And there are some pretty straightforward ways to do that. So I'll make a note of that, and we can come back at the end and maybe dive into how that templating function is set up. But I want to come back to Tracy now and kind of talk about some of the more tactical things, and use this as a bit of a bridge to get into our reflection process. So Tracy, specifically, Andy and you both alluded to your note to next day self. I think that's such a powerful concept and a good illustration, and again, kind of segue into the back end of this process and reflecting back. So can you talk a little bit more about your note to next day self?
I started writing a note to my next day self probably 5 years ago, maybe 6. I was trying to replicate Sean Blanc's The Note. He has a really popular article that helps him to write consistently. He just leaves himself a little sticky note on top of his computer that outlines what he's going to write about as soon as he opens his computer every morning. Turns out what was happening with me, and this is after I'd lost my job and was trying to do some communication consulting, and I'd never had to manage my own time before, right? And so I was reeling with all of that. And as I was writing this note to my next day self, I made the mistake of not providing myself the constraints of a sticky note. And in fact, instead of writing in a note at all, I was using some digital program. And what happened every afternoon was, instead of setting myself up for success the next day, I was beating up my same day self for the stuff that I didn't get done. And I said some things to myself that would be, as we would say here in the South, fighting words if somebody said that about my mama or my BFF. And I realized something needed to change. So I set some boundaries for the way I was going to start talking to myself every afternoon for my next day self. And I just started doing that, and it helped a ton. And I filled up notebooks by setting a constraint, right? And putting this note to next day self on one single page at the end of the day. And I started to change the way I viewed myself. I started to change the way I viewed the world. And when Rome came around, and I'm so jealous, Mark, of your Genesis block that you shared, because I went to find mine a few weeks ago, and for whatever reason, I destroyed my Rome at Genesis block, and I'm devastated. It's just so sad. But I loved Rome. I loved people. I loved the people of Rome. I was trying to figure out this Rome thing, but I'm not very tech savvy. And I was really having trouble wrapping my mind around this stuff. And I thought, well, what do you know? Well, you know, journaling, you know, these practices that you use, the practices that you teach that work. So I started throwing all of my journaling practices from analog or day one or whatever into Rome. And I started teaching this note to my next day self on Twitter, because where else do you communicate in a pandemic? And guys like Andy and so many other people started picking up on it. It was just a way to showcase block references. And turns out It is an effective method of communicating with yourself. I also did an interview with Benjamin Hardy on his book, Personality Isn't Permanent. And I asked him, what's the deal with this note today, next day self? Why does it work? And he explained the value of separating our past selves from our current selves, from our future selves, that when we separate those, we learn to show ourselves grace. And there's the psychology of it is way too deep to get into here. But what Rome lets us do with this note to next day self is throw stuff to ourselves in the future, whether it's tomorrow or next week or next month. And it helps us today write down the person we want to become, the person we aspire to be. And that influences our actions for today. And it's just a magnificent practice. And I can't imagine any other tool being as effective as Rome for doing this amazing work with your inner self.
Yeah, I agree. It's been really powerful for me in my personal life, and totally agree with that. Andy, I'd love to come over to you on this as well, because you have implemented Tracy's note to next day self idea. And so I'd love to have you talk about it. And specifically, Andy, I was curious, you mentioned you use the Delta feature. And so speaking of a kind of lesser technical users, that's a feature I'm familiar with notionally, but I have not found any uses for it. So I'd love to have you talk a little bit about tactically how you implement that note to next day self.
Yeah, well, it's weird because so when Tracy first introduced this idea of this note to everybody, I think on a slight tangent, it's such a simple technique to use. So if you want to get started, it's like the easiest way to get started because it's such a powerful technique for something that's so straightforward. So if you only did that, it kind of starts the cycle moving. And to me, the trick is because if you're in Rome every day anyway, then that's why it works, because if you throw it to the next day, it's the first thing you're going to see. And that's why I like using Delta for it, because so when Tracy started and how she described it originally, let me share my screen, because
please.
It's probably easier. I can show you then how it.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you could give us a visual on that. It'd be great.
So yeah, let's pretend I'm about to write my note to my next day self. So I just indent under the block, and this is one of the weirdest things, and this every now and then I still catch myself thinking, well, this is a bit hokey, but it is just this weird mind shift, because for those who aren't familiar, basically you're writing your note to yourself or to your future self as if you're going to read it tomorrow. So I literally write it as, so what day we want to do? A Saturday. So this is how I started. So it's Good Morning Sunday, Andy, and then so I'm holding shift down as I hit enter, because I just like to generally have it all in just one single block, but it really doesn't matter. And I'll show you why in a minute. Then I just write what I'm gonna write. Can't type when everyone's watching me.
Pressure's on. Yeah. So here you're basically writing just, have a good day, whatever. Like you're talking to your future self literally as if it's a different person.
Yeah, and it's kind of giving your future self the benefit of your smarter past self. So all the mistakes you made today, you can tell yourself tomorrow what you're going to do differently, and you can writing it this way, and Tracy described it as sort of like writing it in this loving way, because it's kind of being compassionate for your future self. It's acknowledging that you weren't necessarily the best you could be today, but you get another chance tomorrow. So it's the thing I do pretty much at the end of the day. I like to leave it as late as possible in one sense, so that it always ends your day in a little positive way, and then it kind of starts the day in a positive way as well by reading it the next day. So essentially you just write it. Now the way Tracy originally described it, and you can just do this, so literally just tag the block for tomorrow, And that's all you need to do. When you go to the next day page, it's just going to appear here in your
Right,
linked
in your linked
references.
references.
So
Yeah.
that's like the really super easy way of doing it. What I realized once Delta came out, that Delta made it easy, because the problem I had with that is, like, once you get like a big daily note page and you're filling it out and filling a lot of stuff, these linked references fall down the bottom, so they're kind of easy to miss and kind of just not so visible. So to me, because of the way that Delta works, it will throw it to whatever future point in time, and it sends it straight away to that page, so it's already there. So it means that when I get to that page in the morning, it's at the top of the page, so I kind of have to read past it to be able to then insert my daily note template stuff, so I can't miss it. So that's why I like using Delta for it. Now, there's several different ways you can do it with Delta. If you right click on the block itself, if you get to the really weird looking Delta menu item, the one that you want is the unnamed child one, the Delta ... The reason being is the way Delta works is the blocks that you're on, if you just choose this Delta, it just sends this block. If you use the child one, then it sends this block and all its children, which is what we want. We want to send this whole thing to tomorrow. So you can right click, choose Delta and click on this one, and that will send it. I don't like doing that because I like using the keyboard. So the keyboard shortcut is Alt or Option if you're on a Mac, Alt, Shift and Enter. So you're not going to see me do this, but you can see I have my cursor on the NTNDS block and I'm hitting Alt, Shift and Enter, and the block disappears and it replaces it with the little asterisk, which actually is a link to where it's gone. But if I go to and jump to tomorrow, you can see it's already sitting here now, and because it's a Delta block, it's grayed out because it's not actually tomorrow, so there's no point me clicking it, and I don't need to click it anyway. I'm only ever sending one day forwards, but you can see it's already sitting here. So as soon as I get here tomorrow morning, I can't do anything but read it. So it kind of puts it straight in front of your face, and that's really to me the whole point of the exercise.
Got it. Okay. Yeah.
Just
go ahead,
super
Tracy.
quick. When you're writing this note to your next day self, that how you address yourself is really important. Andy got it just right. Dear Sunday, Andy, you got to address yourself warmly. And then you sign off by respectfully or love or whatever that is, Saturday, Andy. Those things are important. And if they're hard to do, it means you really need to learn to address yourself with that compassion. Thank you so much for doing that so well, Andy. It just warms my heart. Thanks.
Andy, I'd
I got to say thank you for introducing me to the technique in the first place, because it is such a game-changing technique. It's bizarre how well it works, but it really does work.
Andy, I was just going to say, I love how your day began with a stoic passage about being swollen with water and slathered in cow dung, but it ends in this really sweet note to yourself, which I think is a great progression.
Yeah, absolutely.
and a good sort of representation of stoicism, I think, in a loose sense.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I would love to come over to you, Mark, and maybe let's zoom out a little bit and talk about reflection in general. What is your approach to reflection? So do you do daily reflections, weekly reflections? When you do those, are you simply going in and just reading your past entries? Do you have any additional writing you're doing in your reflection process? Give us an overview of that from a high level.
Okay, so my reflection process is not scheduled, and it is in fact kind of again serendipitous. What I usually find myself doing is one of three things. The first of those is to work an awful lot with something that I came across during our Rome Book Club sessions, and that was Matt Brockwell's idea of semantic goldmines. So one morning while I'm writing, perhaps I get a prompt about happiness. And so I'll go up into the search field and I'll just type that word. And if I have to, create a page called happiness. And then beneath that, in the linked references, I'll see all these things from my journal. Every time I mentioned happiness, you could do this with the word happy. You could do it with challenged. You can do it with, I think the first time I used this that got me such dramatic results was the phrase, I want, or something like that. And suddenly here's this list of all these things I'd said I had wanted over time, which can give you a lot of insight into yourself and who you are. So I use Semantic Goldmines a lot. The other thing that I'll do is, you may have noticed when I was sharing screens, and I'll do this just very briefly now to say, you'll see that I use an awful lot of emoji in the stuff that I write in my journal. I never used emoji, not even in my phone texts, until I started working with Rome. And part of that was because it was a little bleak and I wanted a little color, and emoji made that very easy. My model, or my hero for journaling, is Carl Jung, whose Red Book, is this wonderful, beautifully illustrated book he kept while he worked on his ideas about dreams and dream interpretation and archetypes. And I'm a digital artist, but I can't do with my hands the kind of art that he created as he created the Red Book. But I can give things a little visual spice with emoji. And to bring this back around to the reflection process, now what I'm discovering is that these little emoji also become great ways to look back and reflect on the things I've written before. For example, just as a quick sample, if I put in, say, the tornado emoji, where'd it go? T-O-R, tornado. Then right away, Rome is surfacing for me anytime I've talked about tornadoes being a part of things in my journal and my experience of my life. So that's just a little peek at some of the ways that I look back and reflect. I'm very eager to take a Rome 42 Smart Block and maybe integrate it into my daily page, my daily journal template, and have it just surface a random block without any kind of connection to like a prompt or something, just to see what comes up. I like the idea of shuffling my life and drawing a card and using that as a prompt for my thoughts in the day.
Yeah, I love that. And I got to say that the several mentions that we've had on this call of the random functionality of Rome 42 is really compelling to me. I had mentioned in the chat that I'm still using pretty much a vanilla implementation of Rome. That's certainly not for any reason other than just I haven't felt a really pulling need to go spend time on other things. But I love that idea of pulling in random prompts. And we've seen that in a couple of different implementations on this call. And I think that's such a powerful tool for promoting good journaling. Because I have noticed one of the things that I struggle with in my journaling practice is falling into patterns where it starts to feel very rote and mechanical. And you have to catch yourself going through the motions and pulling yourself back into really putting your all into it. And I think pulling random prompts into the process and random reminders even of past events would be a great way to do that. I'd love to come back over to you, Tracy, and we talked very specifically.
Sorry, Jason.
Go ahead, Andy.
Just
yeah,
while
please.
there was two kind of things on that sort of from what Mark was talking about, but the just in terms of that rote idea, this is one of the reasons, when we can maybe talk about it shortly in the review bit, but the way that I block reference questions, when you do that, it allows you to start to see which ones you keep answering, and then conversely which ones you didn't answer, because that usually will tell you something about that and kind of start to surface that, like, why do I always answer that question? Why am I not answering this question? So you can kind of look for the absences as well, as one of those ways. But if I could just quickly share my screen, I just wanted to touch on the Semantic Goldmine, because I was going to mention it if Mark didn't mention it. I just wanted to show you, because that's something that I've only just started doing. So I've screenshot this one because I didn't want to show a load of stuff. But the other way you can do it is literally select a phrase, and this is one of those elements of reflection and review, is like, if you start looking back at your entries, if you notice, like I noticed I write I need a lot, and you can see that because so I highlighted I need and turned it into a page reference just so I could come to this page, and I've linked twice with it, but it's the unlinked references that I'm interested in, because this now shows me that I have written 341 times that I need something. And you can see pretty much almost every single day on my daily notes page, I'm writing some form of I need. So I can now just kind of spend as long as I want kind of drilling down into that and looking at what are all these things that I keep saying I need. And so look for those kind of phrases. That's this wonderful thing that Rome gives you. And this is one of the reasons why Rome is so good at journaling. It's this second phase of reflection and the ability to review what you've got that actually is the biggest reason to journal in Rome, because you can journal in lots of stuff, but it's this ability of drilling in and finding these connections that really makes journaling kind of come alive and start changing your behavior.
Yeah. Well, that's a really interesting approach. And just to drill in on that a little bit in case anyone didn't quite follow. So you went and simply created, maybe you have an inkling that it's like, I'm typing this phrase a lot. Like maybe I'm anxious. So let me go create if I haven't already, let me go create a page that's called anxious. Simply go do that and then go look in the unlinked references, which is a really powerful feature. I think that's an underappreciated feature in Rome. We talk a ton about two-way linking and linked references and block references, but the unlinked references, I think, is really powerful, an easy way to go in and just see all of these times, like in your example, that you're writing the phrase "I need." And again, that could be extrapolated out to anything that you feel like maybe you're saying a lot in your writing, and you just want to get a sense for how often that's occurring. That's really interesting. Yeah. Cool. Well, let's come back over to you, Tracy, and again talk at a high level about your reflection process. What sort of practices have you implemented to go back and derive value out of your journal after the writing has already been done?
My reflection is light, and Dr. Brockwell is amazing with his semantic goldmines. Occasionally I'll play with one of the things that he discovers and shares on Twitter. But this is how I used to journal. This is where I put my notes to my next day self and my Dear Abba letters. And you see how here I've got these little notes. I've also generally highlighted some things that meant something to me. And the way I would reflect here is through these tabs. And I would immediately create a tab and a highlight when, after I wrote something, I got an aha moment, because I wanted to intentionally resurface that growth area. I wanted to be able to call it up later. And that's exactly how I use Rome research. About the only reflections that I do are based on delta functions that I want to resurface. I'll also tag questions that I want to answer that I ask during my journaling process, like whether I'm frustrated or excited, or if I have an idea. I want to intentionally resurface these things in some format. So I'll either tag it as a question, and then I'll come back through on a Saturday and Sunday and resurface all of the questions. And sometimes it's like, well, that was a dumb idea, and it's no longer a question. Other times I will continue the question. I'll write a couple of things in it, and then I'll carry it forward. But I think my favorite way of reflection, and again, the common denominator here is the way I reflect is I force reflection. So for me, the most effective way to force reflection is through spaced repetition. And that sounds so weird for me to say, because I don't get spaced repetition. I'm not even sure, honestly, which Rome plugin I'm using to get to the spaced repetition, but it's like something like Control-Shift-1 or Option-Shift, so whatever that is. And I'll intentionally resurface it in 3 to 5 days. And Andy has explained spaced repetition to me so many times, but I still don't know what the little numbers mean. I just know I want to see it in 3 days, 5 days, 10 days, something like that. Whatever it decides to give me is fine. It is so not tech savvy. It is so undisciplined in terms of reflection for a journaling pro, as whatever that means, but it works for me. It's how I make sure that an idea that seems interesting to me or important to me gets resurfaced to my future self at some point to reconsider. And that's pretty much my reflection method.
Got it.
How's that for just hanging it all out there?
Yeah. No, it's great because I think there's actually an important nugget in there, which is, and you said it in passing, but I want to come back and reiterate it. You do what works for you, right? And I think that's a really important point, because sometimes we can fall into the trap of thinking like, oh, if I'm not doing a ritual weekly reflection or a ritual monthly reflection, I'm doing it wrong. And the fact of the matter is, like, I do weekly. I've tried to do monthly, and I can't seem to get into that habit. But I'm in a pretty regular habit of sitting down with my Sunday morning coffee and going back through, and I have my process for doing that. But the fact that the monthly hasn't worked out, like, I catch myself sometimes, and actually my journal is what brought this to light for me. Was like, why am I beating myself up over not getting into this monthly practice? Like, maybe I just don't need it. Maybe it's just not, I'm not ready for it, whatever the case may be. So I think, again, the key point there is, like, find what works for you. And there is no right or wrong way.
Journaling is a place to find our guilt-free zones. There's no guilt, no judgment. And if you're feeling guilty about not having a gratitude practice or not doing journaling right, then there's some journaling work to be done about self-compassion. And that's
Right.
okay too.
Right. Yeah. And to be clear, like, even my weekly review is pretty niched, right? Like, I'm not necessarily going back and reviewing everything in my journal. It's more project centric. So I've always got 2 or 3 sort of projects that I'm thinking about. These are core areas that I want to push forward. Rome Summit right now is a great example of that. I've got a personal blog, and my weekly reflection tends to focus on what are the things that I said I was going to get done this week on these projects. Did those get done? Did they not? Why or why not? How do I feel about that? What do I want to get done next week? That sort of thing. So it's more of a priority setting, goal setting type of framework.
You know, another thing to remember, Jason, is
Yeah,
even if you never open your journal and look back again, the process of keeping a journal changes your experience of life. And I think it's important to note that even if you don't have a reflection practice, just the fact that you're noticing and writing and contemplating begins to change who you are, and therefore, you know, your experience of the world around you. So
nobody
don't worry.
needs to read your journal, not even you, if that's not where you are. Absolutely.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great point. And I think that's a great transition here into our conclusion. And so maybe I'll come over to you, Mark, here first for this one, and talk a little bit about somebody who's listening or watching this and is thinking about getting started with a journaling practice. If you could sort of convey one thing to them about getting started and creating a meaningful, impactful habit of journaling in Rome, what would that be?
The number one thing is to just jump in and get started. Don't worry about doing it wrong. I don't believe you can do it wrong. What you're doing will evolve over time. You might think about a time of day that works well for you. I find that willpower is not a commodity I possess a lot of, but I am attuned to habit. So every morning, the first thing I'm doing is I'm grabbing my MacBook Pro, opening it, starting Rome Research, and starting that journaling practice. And if I do that every day, it's now just the first thing I think of. I'm hungry for it when I get up. And the benefit you'll get, I think, from this practice is that haunting line from Blade Runner about all people's memories when they die being lost like tears in rain. The beautiful thing you'll get from this practice is that your life will be more consciously lived. You'll be more attuned to those little moments, and they will not be lost. They'll be preserved especially in a tool like Rome. They're going to be preserved in a collaborative partner. They're going to be preserved in a system that can bring those insights back to you when you need them most.
Very well said. Thank you for that, Mark. Would love to come over to you, Andy, with the same question. So for anyone who's thinking about getting started with a journaling practice, what's kind of one key thing that you would convey to them about creating a meaningful habit here?
I think it's the things we've kind of already talked about. One, which is tie it to something that you already do, so that's the way to kind of get the habit. but don't worry so much about consistency. You don't have to do it every day, and if you miss, it doesn't matter, as long as you kind of come and try again. What One of the things I've found, and I'm actually kind of doing, is like, don't actually have to journal every day. So I'm just setting a standard for myself. If we have a minute, I'll share my other review stuff, because you'll actually see it in there. My review stuff actually is, I'm just aiming for 5 out of 7 days a week from that point of view. So just don't worry about not doing it every day. It doesn't matter. You can't do it wrong, and it'll change over time. Just get started. Just dump some stuff, and you'll soon figure out a rhythm. And it'll change. So I think the biggest thing we can say is just don't worry about it. Don't not do it because you don't know how to get started. Like in the chat, there's lots of discussion about journaling prompts. There's billions of prompts. So if you don't know where to start, grab some prompts and use those as a starting point. I guess we'll all be sharing our prompts and things. So if in doubt, use a prompt, but just get started.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and we've had some conversation in the chat, and I'm going to do some follow up after this session, and we'll see if we can get a bunch of those prompts maybe aggregated on the Rome Summit graph, which can be found at romesummit.com. But to your point, Andy, I think that it's key to make those your own. Like, using a library of prompts is awesome for inspiration, and you may indeed find a bunch of them in there that you take and run with indefinitely. But ultimately, I believe the most effective thing is you've got to sort of remix, right? We talk about the idea of remixing ideas in the Rome community a lot, and I think prompts are a good example of that. So the most valuable source of prompts that I've found, at least, is in my own thinking, and taking certain prompts that I'm working with today and sort of continuing to optimize and modify those over time. The other thing, Andy, that you and Mark both said that I think I want to just underscore is finding a specific time of day and sort of linking that to, your morning or evening routine can be really helpful. And then again, just not beating yourself up if you don't do it every day. It's an important practice, and even doing it once or twice a week, to Mark's point, just the act of doing it alone can make a huge difference. Tracy, I'd love to come over to you here. What's one piece of advice you'd give to somebody who's just getting started?
I think the first thing to do is to acknowledge that you're running an experiment and define the parameters of that experiment. X of Y days, like Andy said, plan for imperfection. What are you going to do the first day that you don't journal? So the next thing would be, maybe write down some questions that you want to explore with this little experiment that you're doing. Maybe jot down, this is probably your first journal entry, right? What does success look like at the end of this 7 or 14-day experiment? And then I would say that as you're building your daily notes template, if you're new to Rome, just use the onboard template. Don't worry about 42 smart block. And Chris with Rome Hacker would tell you the exact same thing. He wants you to use his product when you're ready, but if you're new, just use what's simple, because the first thing you're going to want to do is build the constraints within your daily notes template. Julia Cameron, this is a 25th anniversary of the Artist's Way, in which she introduced morning pages. And she said, write 5 handwritten pages every day. But for 25 years, people have been defining the constraint. How big is a page? Is it this big or is it this big? So define your constraints. Maybe your constraint is a 10-minute Pomodoro. Maybe it's one single prompt, or maybe it's X words for Y days a week. So as you're building your daily notes template, build that constraint. And the cool thing is it's an experiment. And so your constraint tomorrow doesn't have to be the same constraint today. And now guess what? You're learning about the constraints and how you can build constraints. Play with it. This is fun. It's joy. And then, of course, the last thing, I'm going to reiterate what everybody said. When are you going to write? And sometimes it's less about the time of day and more about, are you going to write after this thing that you do every day or just before this thing you do every day? Is it going to be as soon as you open your computer, like Mark and me? Or is it going to be the last thing you do before you close your lid at night? For me, I do my afternoon journaling prompts. And this is so American, I guess. At 4:30 every afternoon, the Jeopardy music rolls, and I grab my laptop and I go out to the living room because my mom and I are getting ready to watch Jeopardy, and I get to do that while people are answering questions. That's my afternoon journaling prompt. So find whatever works for you, and just use those emojis. Have fun. And if you're struggling, this sounds really stupid, but this is an old broadcasting trick, and it works. If you're struggling and you're white knuckling it, smile while you're doing this, and the whole world is going to change, and you're going to remember to have fun.
Great advice. That's an awesome place to move into wrapping up. And I want to just thank you all for opening up and sharing. Journaling can be a really personal practice, and really appreciate you guys being willing to come on here and share everything that you're doing. And Mark and Andy even walking the tightrope over there of showing your personal graphs and being willing to open that up. Awesome engagement in the chat. So thank you everybody who was there as well. Really, really appreciate it. This was so much fun. As we move to wrap up here, just want to mention a few quick ways to connect with the Rome Summit. So you can head over to subscribe.romesummit.com to get onto the email list. I did mention in the chat that I'm going to be sending out some session notes and other resources after this. So if you want to make sure that you receive those and you're not already on the email list, be sure to do that. Rome Summit now officially has a Twitter handle. So this is new this week. And so we're trying to get that, get everyone over there and get that followed. So again, that's brand new, but go check that out at Rome Summit and give us a follow, give us a retweet. Let's get the community built up there. And then finally, if you have a question, suggestion, idea for a future panel, want to appear and join us on one, shoot me an email at jason@romesummit.com. So those are 3 ways to get in touch and connect. Again, appreciate everybody being here. Tracy, Mark, Andy, thank you so much for being part of the panel.
Thanks for hosting this, Jason. I'm so proud of your entire series. It's so much fun to learn from Romans.
That's very kind of you. I appreciate the feedback. With that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Hope everybody has a great weekend, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care.
See you soon.